for people that are brand new to the idea of healing, of trauma, of nervous system dysregulation by asking you a question. Do you believe that the majority of breakdowns or mental health issues that we face as adults go back to the issue of stress, trauma, hypervigilance that you experienced during childhood?
I absolutely. And that also is to include, however, the structural brain neurological changes. This is where we can, I think, as a field, get caught in a little bit of the chicken or the egg, because again, because stress does imprint on us biologically, genetically, a lot of us do then see or born with even structural changes, right, in our brain, imbalances in neurotransmitters. Again, the field is still the psychology field that is, and the medical field, if I'm being perfectly honest, is still learning, is still evolving, is still growing. And it took until, within the past decade for us to realize that one of the number one things, I'm sure maybe some listeners have heard of, neurotransmitters, right? This idea that when you're diagnosed with a mental illness, whatever it might be, your neurotransmitters are off. A hormone in your body that impacts our mood. While that is absolutely part of the story, for a very long time, we located the neurotransmitter production and maintenance right in our brain. And now we understand that it isn't just our brain that creates and produces and uses neurotransmitters. It is our gut, right? So now we have another whole part of the body that is impacted by decisions that we're making, food we're eating, pollutants that are in, toxins that are in the food that we're eating, habits around eating the food that, again, were passed through generations. So to simply answer your question, we can't localize it to just one exact factor, in my opinion, which is why I'm such a proponent, and I've shifted the way that I work and think and practice and teach into a more holistic model, because it's all of it. And the reality of it is there are structural changes. There are imbalances in our nervous system. There's dysregulation in our nervous system and imbalances in our neurotransmitter, I should say, that are creating then the symptoms that are, resulting in diagnoses. And my hope is to take the whole picture into account and to give people the opportunity to explore the deeper underlying causes, because that's the area where we can begin to intervene by making new choices, by creating a different internal environment for ourselves, by creating a different external environment for us to live into, can then help us resolve some of those longstanding symptoms.
So I'm going to give you a personal example, okay? Because I think it will help people start to process where we're going to go with this conversation by thinking about this example. And I will be the emotionally immature parent in the example, okay? So we have a daughter who has just started to talk openly about the fact that she feels very stuck in life. In her words, that she does not feel alive, that there are very few experiences happening in her day-to-day life where she feels truly alive. And the other thing, and this is sort of a little joke, is that we say, we love you because you don't take yourself that seriously. She's really, really funny, but you take everything else so seriously. So she is the typical hypervigilant, on top of everything, stressed out, got to get everything right. And when I apply your work to this situation, knowing that she's talking to a therapist, I say that as her mother, when she was born, I had severe postpartum depression. I had an incredibly traumatic birth, and I was, in your words, emotionally immature, which means I personally, as a new mom and just as a human being at the age of 29 or 30, I could not handle my emotions. I screamed, I vented, I, was very unpredictable. And on top of it, for the first 8 weeks of her life, because the postpartum depression was so severe, Dr. Nicole, and I was so heavily medicated because it was a dangerous situation psychologically and physically for me, I couldn't take care of her. And she has, now that she's an adult and in therapy, and she just did, some really interesting guided psychedelic therapies, has had now a memory of that period of her life as an infant and really being in distress, wanting me to come. And just remembering my husband coming and one of our close friends that would sit with me while my husband was at work while I was very sick. And she also has had this sort of experience in therapy of realizing that I really wanted to be there. But that core experience very much cemented a kind of experience of the world for her. And I, of course, was just passing down the lineage of stressed out, volatile, intense, not that warm kind of behavior that I grew up around. When I look all the way through my lineage of, you know, immigrant working in coal mines, domestic servants, farmers, like work, hard work. And I look at her, and as, she's talking about a job and she's talking about doing this, and I'm thinking, actually, this is about you healing. The I hate to say it this way, so please correct me, but I feel like the damage I fucking did to you because I didn't know any better.
Yeah, I want to commend a couple things here, Mel. First, your honesty in sharing these experiences, and also the environment that you've since created. It sounds like, to the extent that your daughter is able to, right, begin to share these realities, these conscious awarenesses that she's having, because that is a gift to be able to communicate honestly with those closest to us, especially those that might have been a participant in whatever create the circumstances that we lived in our past, in our earliest life. That is such a gift, because few families, I think, have at any time, and I know my family in particular, now we're just recently starting to be able to share things with each other in honesty, share what our different realities, I have two other siblings, are, and allow that to be the case. So that is absolutely something to celebrate. And the reality of it is, when we don't have the resources to take care of ourselves, and when we're stuck in this dysregulation that we're talking about in our nervous system, we're stuck in a survival mode in and of itself of our own. And so my heart, I actually felt myself welling up in emotion hearing you share that story, for not only your daughter, for you as well. Like you were sharing the awareness that she had of you wanting, right, to be present. And I think postpartum depression is one of those rarely talked about experiences that is so, I think a lot of times it's highlighted on how it is for the child of that disconnection, though how painful it is for the parent who in their heart wants to be. And I think this is the case with all of us, as with all parents, is there's a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned
Mm-hmm.
individuals that are of two minds within themselves, if they're even aware of it or not, of wanting to show up in whatever way, in a tuned and connected in a loving way, oftentimes wanting to reverse patterns that they know didn't serve them from their own childhood, yet not being able to, because the reality, and I use the term survival mode to really highlight the reality that when we're in survival mode, and this is all just driven by our nervous system, so it's not anything logical, our survival is our priority, which means that a child, a loved one, a partner, right, isn't where our attention and our resources need to be allocated at that moment. It's quite literally in us getting through the next few moments of life. And this might sound dire, which is why, again, I'm just offering that this is all driven by our ability to survive, by our evolution as a human. So this is, again, where we are of two minds, where we might desperately want to show up, to connect, to be attuned to our child, and our body might not be prioritizing that child at all. It might be prioritizing us and our survival and us making it through the next moment, however difficult that moment is. And so, again, I just want to, thank you for your honesty in shining the light on a topic as this, because I've spoken and worked with, in my past practice, a lot of women who were so shameful about the experience of having, that deep rooted depression, even of, this is another controversial, I think, thing to admit, of maybe being of two minds about how it is to actually be a mother, right? There might be a very well-intentioned part that does want to show up and does want to be in care of a child. And the reality of needing to be in care of someone else for 24 hours a day is very difficult. It's very challenging. And there might be then conflicts in and of itself. So again, I want to commend you for your honesty. And I want to commend the environment that's being created in your home where these things can be talked about. Because I think the more we're able to, again, be non-judgmentally honest with ourselves and with other people to relieve ourselves, like you're even sharing. When I look back in time, I see the same patterns, just like I experienced with my mom. When I look back at her family experience, it's cold, it's disconnection. She literally had a father who came home from work. He was the financial support of the household, put up his newspaper, and quite literally ignored the children. So it's not surprising that the mother then emotionally that I, was born into didn't have the tools to emotionally connect, no matter how much she wanted to do different and knew that that was a painful experience for herself. She was locked in her own survival mode and was just simply unable to.
Yeah, I agree. And in sharing the story, it actually is somewhat liberating for me because I don't want to pass down that generational cycle or trauma of being in survival mode and having a conflicted relationship with giving and receiving love. And what I can so profoundly see is that since I'm catching this in myself at 47 and I'm still working on it, my kids probably, I'd say at least 6 or 7 times a week go, "Watch your tone, mom. Watch your tone of voice." For me is when my emotional immaturity kicks in, when my inability to tolerate something. Mel Robbins is now her 8-year-old self because her tone of voice goes nasty, just like I heard in my household the tone of voice in the adults around me go nasty when I was 8 years old. And so I want to make it very clear as a takeaway for people that if you are resonating with this idea of, being in breakdown or feeling stuck or feeling disconnected in your adult life, first of all, we all go through it. If not a lot, a couple times, right? A couple big breakdowns everyone goes through. So it's normal, but it's not, it's good news because you're awakening that your current way of living on autopilot or being shut down, or in the words of my daughter, not feeling alive, that's not how you're wired or meant to live. And so this moment of consciousness is an opportunity. And I will also highlight that through my own example, the first place I want you to look is I want you to look at Dr. Nicole's work, because what she's saying is the first place to look is in your childhood and how you have gotten to a point as an adult where your ability to tolerate discomfort emotionally is no longer serving the kind of life you want to live. And I'm willing to say, through experiences I did not mean to create for my daughter, I taught her hyper vigilance. Like she had to become the adult. I wasn't even able to be present. And I feel terrible about that. Do I wish I could go back and wave a magic wand? Absolutely. And I know for both of us, there's this huge opening present for both of our healing, not to mention our ability to have a mature, loving relationship on our own terms versus being in a relationship that is driven by the patterns of our lineage and what we were taught when we were children. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I'm shaking my head very ravenously over here because, I think it's important for me to state as well is I still have moments where for me, my reactivity comes out as passive aggressive, snarky, underhanded comments where I'm not able to directly say it is how I feel to another person. Again, because without that attunement in childhood, without that safety, I learned the act of suppressing it, of going away on my spaceship and not ever saying what was really wrong. I also have a habit of disconnecting from my loved ones, my relationships, of literally going and walling myself off in my bedroom and then holding them responsible for not coming in and not being connected and not supporting me when I need it. And I like to use this visual of it. It's as if I have my hand held out in front of me and I'm demanding, sometimes even with daggers on the end of it, and then demanding someone come and give me a hug. And again, all of this for me, you said something really beautiful that I think is important to touch on. All of this goes back to, for me, the inability to be emotionally connected, to give and receive love in my childhood. And as counterintuitive as that sounds, especially for all of us in relationship, many of us, few of us, I should say, in adulthood, actually have had that lived experience of giving and receiving love for being who we are, for just sharing how it is for us, what we think, what we feel with another individual. So while we might, and this was so much, of my life for so long, all I desperately wanted was to be connected. I would leave partners because you weren't able to connect with me. I didn't feel close to you. And it took until, the awakening that began in my 30s, my 30s, my early 30s, because it was several years of time before I was able to see myself as holding those daggers out, see all of the ways I was disconnected from my own authentic emotions, not sharing them with other people. So how am I going to be deeply and authentically known to someone else? I never gave anyone the opportunity, because for me, it felt so scary, so vulnerable, so threatening, that having those daggers out and blaming you for not coming closer was that safe zone. It was just a replication of that early experience, again, that was created in my household with all of my family members, but namely around my own mom, who wasn't equipped, didn't understand, probably had a deep rooted desire, like I was sharing earlier, to be emotionally connected, but didn't know how herself.
Yeah. I mean, we only can do what we've been trained to do until we wake the hell up and heal ourselves and teach ourselves to do something different. So I just wanted to check in on you because there's a lot going on right now. I was sitting at my desk yesterday and I got the news that Stephen Twitch Boss had died from suicide. And if you have not seen this news or you don't know who he is, let me just kind of share a little bit about him and why it impacted me. So he was best known, and this is how I knew him, for being one of the executive producers of Ellen DeGeneres' talk show. And he was not only an executive producer, he was on that show every single day, 5 days a week. He was the DJ. He would do all the dance parties with Ellen. He has this huge, amazing megawatt smile and his energy. He's just one of those people that you didn't need to know him to know that literally positivity, dancing, spreading like kindness. That's what this guy was all about. And you didn't need to know him to know that he was also all about his wife, Allison, and his 3 like gorgeous kids. And during the pandemic, not only was he there with Ellen, but he and his wife, who are both dancers, started doing all of these choreographed, awesome videos that went viral online. And they spread so much joy for people doing these dances and teaching people with their kids all these dance moves. And they just were this positive, amazing force. And so when I heard the news that he died from suicide yesterday at the age of 40, it just rocked me to my core. And I'm still processing it like 18 hours later. And when I woke up this morning, I also saw that I had missed the fact that yesterday was the 10th anniversary of Sandy Hook. And so I just felt this need to grab my coffee and to run up here. I haven't even washed my face yet this morning and talk to you. And I just wanted to share what I'm thinking and feeling, because I think it's really important that in moments like this, where the news feels overwhelming or the world feels overwhelming, and I know the holidays can just bring up a lot of stuff for a lot of us too, I want to check in on you and I want to check in on myself. And so that's why I decided I'm just going to get on this mic and I'm going to just talk to you And that's it. That's what we're doing today. So, first things first, let's unpack, or I want to share with you what I'm thinking in the wake of learning that somebody that was so light and positive and amazing on the outside, how do you process that kind of news that they died from suicide? And notice the word I'm using. I'm saying died from suicide. And that's because I think about a death from mental health struggles the same way I think about a death from cancer. Like if you have a friend that dies of brain cancer, you say they died from cancer. If you have a friend or a loved one, as every single one of us does, who has died from a struggle with addiction or depression or trauma or toxic stress or any other mental health issue, that mental health challenge deteriorated the physical structure of that person's brain. That's what happened. The same way that brain cancer physically deteriorates the brain until it kills somebody. And so the word choice is really deliberate because it's a recognition of what actually happened. There's a couple other bigger things that I just have to say, and that is that you don't need to know somebody. Like you don't need to know Twitch personally to be affected personally by the news of his death. You don't have to have lived in the Sandy Hook community to be impacted by the news that it was the 10th anniversary yesterday. Because these things that are happening out in the world trigger you to remember experiences of loss in your own life. And so for me personally, I think one of the reasons why I have been so rocked by this news is because, if you look at somebody like Twitch on the outside, this man exuded positivity. You never saw him without a smile on his face. You couldn't watch those dance videos without feeling the ripple of joy. And for me personally, it reminds me of a really dear friend of mine that died from suicide over 10 years ago. And the second that I heard this news about somebody who on the outside looked like they were just doing great, it reminded me of losing somebody that was the same way. And that may be happening to you. And the other thing that this is bringing up for me is that you just have no clue what's going on in somebody else's life. You focus on the beautiful smile that somebody has, or the great job, or the bank account, or the awesome spouse, or the wonderful kids, or the big house. But people don't live at their house. You know where everybody lives? They live inside their heads. And you and I don't have a clue what it's like for somebody else to live with the pain inside their heads. And so, one of the major takeaways here for me is one of Twitch's biggest messages, which is being kind. And the fact that being kind and being positive around other people, you have no clue. In fact, we underestimate the impact that it can have on somebody else's life to just be kind to them. And so that's one takeaway, that you just don't have a clue. So please just don't assume that you know what's going on and assume that everybody is silently battling something. So it's on all of us to be kind to one another. Second thing that I want to say is I need you to be kind to yourself today, because there's a lot swirling around right now. And so if you notice that you're thinking about people that you lost, which I am. I mean, yesterday what was happening for me as I heard the news, and I, of course, immediately thought about his family, is I was transported back to the day that I learned that our dear friend Fred had died from suicide. And it's like I started reliving that day again. As I thought about the pain that Twitch's wife, Allison, and his 3 kids were feeling, I thought about this particular moment on the day that Fred died, where I was with his daughter and we were walking up the front steps to his house. And I knew that when we opened that door, I was going to be present when she learned that her father had died. It is a moment that changed me forever. And so that's also what was happening for me yesterday. And I was thinking about, how much I miss Fred. And I was thinking about how sad and heartbroken I am about all the other people in my life that had struggled with mental health issues and addiction or hopelessness or depression, and how they all died from suicide, and just how much pain there is out there. It can be really overwhelming. If that's happening for you, just be kind to yourself. Like, you may need to sleep in. You may need to go for a walk today. You should probably reach out to a friend and talk to somebody about it. It would be good for you to remember the person and the things that you miss about them. Like remembering somebody that is gone and thinking about the things that you really loved about them. That's a really healthy thing to do on a day like today. But simply being aware that news like this brings up stuff for you that's personal, that's step one. Step two is being kind to yourself. Step three is being proactive about taking care of yourself today and reaching out. And step four is understanding this issue in a larger context. And so now I want to kind of switch gears and address something that's pissing me off. As I see people processing Twitch's death in particular, because this hit me as hard as Robin Williams, as hard as Anthony Bourdain. And I think the reason why it hits people so hard is because you're trying to make sense of somebody who seems like they've got it all together on the outside. And it, in your rational mind, it just makes no sense. And that is where the learning is. See, your mind is rational right now. You're objective. You're not living with the pain the person was living with. So when you look at the situation from your lens, you remove the pain that the person was feeling. And so it makes no sense to your brain because your brain wasn't compromised from the mental health struggle that that person was really battling day in and day out. And so let me go back to the example of brain cancer. If you have a friend that's dying from brain cancer, you see them deteriorate on the outside. You see what's happening. You would never in a million years, when somebody dies from brain cancer, go, oh, that's so selfish. Why did they choose to do that? What about their family? But they had so many resources. But I see so many people writing this horse shit online, and it's pissing me off because it shows that you don't have a freaking clue what it means to struggle with a mental health issue. You don't have a freaking clue. And it really pisses me off when I see people that write really arrogant, pretentious things like, well, I struggled, I was in a dark thing, and I asked for help. Well, that's great. I'm happy that you didn't get so bad, that your brain wasn't so deteriorated, that you could ask for help. When somebody gets to the point that their brain functioning is so eroded that they cannot cognitively, rationally process the fact that there is a huge difference between ending the pain that you're dealing with and ending your life. When somebody gets to the point where they can't think clearly, it means the physical structure of their brain has deteriorated from the mental health battle. That's what that means. And that smile that people put on their faces the whole way through, that is so hard. Can you imagine to get to the point where you love your family so much that you think the only way to save them is to get rid of yourself? Like, this is just, that's how compromised your brain is. And so when I think about this like brain cancer, that the physical brain functioning is deteriorating to the point where nobody can think rationally, that removes all judgment. And all I have is compassion and sadness. That's it. That is it. And that is all there is to have for the people that you've lost, for the folks that we continue to lose. And for anybody that's listening to this, if this is you and you're in a really dark place right now, I want to speak directly to you right now because you're meant to hear this right now. You can address the pain that you're feeling in your mind and your body. You can. And there are people standing by right now that are trained, that want to help you. And with support and with small, tiny moves forward every single day, you can make this pain lessen. You can loosen the grip it has on you, and you can feel better. You can also improve the physical structure of your brain. You can improve the way that you think so that your brain starts to support you. You can face this with a little bit of support. You can. And you can do that, and I want you to do that because we want you here. You have a big, beautiful life, and I know that if you believed that you could somehow lessen the pain you're feeling, you would want to live that life. And so please, please, please get support for the pain that you're feeling and hold on to the life that you have, because your life is worth fighting for. And there are people that want to help you. We have resources in the show notes, not only for here in the United States, but also for multiple languages, international resources. And so I just felt the need to talk to you, to check in with you. Be kind to yourself today. Stop assuming that you know what other people are thinking. Remember the people that you've lost and the things that you loved about them. And together, we'll get through this. We will. I promise. Can you talk a little bit about what you were feeling and kind of not knowing the words depression, anxiety, anger? Like, what was it like for you, Lorenzo, to be a kid and to lose your dad at 10 and to not have your mom around and to experience the racism and bias that you experienced in your life, so that you can describe for people who may not have considered, oh, he's describing how I feel. That's depression. He's describing how I feel. That's anxiety. So tell us a little bit about what it was like for you.
Yeah. A lot of it was just the way of life, honestly. I knew in some ways, in many ways, that I had a really good upbringing, which I really did. I believe my aunt and uncle did a really good job of ensuring that so many ways that I, you know, was able to have the support that I needed. But beyond that, I knew that there was something not really right for the most part around the way that I felt about things.
How
And
did you
so,
feel?
lost,
Hmm.
a lot of times very angry. And the reality of it was, maybe I blamed it on, oh, I don't like this teacher at school, or I'm not getting along with friends in the neighborhood. But the reality of it was, I didn't feel seen and heard because the truth of the matter, I didn't have my mother and father around, and I didn't, share their love and that connection with them. So I didn't feel really seen and heard, and I did feel that I had been left out, and so I think in so many ways I was struggling emotionally from those challenges and from those, the anxieties that came with that. Do they love me? Did I do something wrong? Is it a reason that they're not here? Did
Hmm.
I have something to do with that? Like, these are the kind of questions that go on in a young person's head when they're, especially when everything has not truly been explained. Because, I think one thing as adults, we want to ensure that, our children have a great life. But I think giving them more of the story sometimes may even hurt them to tell you the real story. And so I think in so many ways, that was kind of my reality. But the reality behind it is that I, really struggled emotionally. And it really showed up in school. I was in a behavioral health facility at the age of 10. And I
Explain that to people who have not worked in criminal justice like I have. So what does behavioral health facility mean?
Yeah, so I went into had some challenges in school, and had been kicked out a few times. I think I was probably more in the third grade at that point, so couldn't stay in class. So it was, hey, this is my next option.
Can I just say something? When you have kids that go undiagnosed with depression and anxiety and who feel invisible, of course there will be behavioral issues. And it makes
Yes,
me very angry and sad, Lorenzo, how many kids are getting disciplined because they, quote, can't behave, when the real issue is there are mental health challenges that the child is facing, or there are learning style differences that the child has that are not recognized and addressed by the capable adults around them.
yes,
And so it just makes me angry to hear that a third grader is being kicked out of school because of
mhm,
behavioral issues. So here you are, you're getting kicked out of school, you're having behavioral issues because you can't understand or tolerate this, like, just swirl of emotion that you're feeling. And you end up in this behavioral health facility. What was that like?
yeah. It was. I was away for about 2 months. They did allow us to go home on weekends. It was mostly structured, seeing a therapist, going to do school during the day. But obviously, it was very it was a very dark place to be at as a young kid. Someone that I had never been away from home for that amount of time. I had just lost my dad, and really that was my way. I was really angry and upset from the loss of him, so that really swirled into challenges at school, which led me there. And I think that's the one thing that we have to recognize in society, is that when someone's going through grief and those different challenges, that it can look different and it can manifest into mental health challenges.
And if you already felt lost in life and wondered if people cared about you and wondered where you belong, to have your dad then die, that only just kicks that in high gear. And so
Yeah.
it doesn't surprise me that it comes out as anger. And I think that's what happens a lot of time with men in particular, is you guys get sad and you guys experience loss or disappointment and or bias or discrimination, and you shove it down. And what happens when you shove all that down is that a volcano erupts. And that's what you're describing. And so, a kid that needed grief counseling ends up acting out at school and then gets sent somewhere for behavioral health, which is just, again, pointing to how we fail people so much when it comes to challenges that we face emotionally and mentally. Is that when you learned that it might be anxiety or depression, or did they just sort of calm you down and send you back to school?
I think I understood it more as this was a getaway because my dad had passed. It was just in my reality. It was a getaway from home to really process the loss of him, and I think everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so, moving past that point, going back into school, it was also a sense of shame attached to where I had been, and I think this is where the stigma of mental health really shows up, because here I am going back to school. It's like, oh, where have you been? I hadn't seen you in a while. And it's like, yeah, I've been to this place, right? And trying to make it more cool than knowing it wasn't cool, because not wanting to be shamed. And I
Yeah.
think that's very common is, we think about mental health and having these conversations, is because that's how it typically looks, where we don't really empower the situation more or less and say, yeah, I was kind of displaced and it was different than what I'm really describing, but really I'm describing it differently because I'm ashamed of where I really was, right? And
Yeah.
so I experienced that early on in life, which
Mm.
really also I think can be a part of our lived experience.
That's right. Because if you are surrounded by either a family or a community or an entire culture where there is shame or judgment for getting help, or, it's weak if you are struggling emotionally or mentally. Like, I always find it interesting that, for example, if you're in financial stress, like you can't pay your freaking bills. I've been in that place where I can't put groceries on the table. I'm sitting there, with the check card, and I'm like, dear God, please let there be a computer failure and let this go through, because I know there's no money in this account, but maybe I'll swipe it and it'll work. And worrying about real financial stress is a form of anxiety.
It is.
Feeling shame that you can't pay your bills can lead to depression. And so these very real experiences that people have lead to mental health challenges that make it worse and make it harder for you to face it. But so you come back from this and you continue with school, and then you have one more incident, right? That really was a wake-up call for you.
Yeah.
Can you describe what happened?
Yeah. So, later, I always say fast forward to, being 17 years old. I moved past that point, of going through that, and I always say I kind of went through my honeymoon period after post being in a behavioral health facility, and, and then I found myself joining a gang.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to, me being incarcerated, with due to a firearm. But I want to back up,
Yeah.
because I think one of the things that I really want to shine light on is it wasn't me joining a gang and being charged with a firearm that really is old. But I want to really also encompass that the loss, again, the mental health challenges, and the not being, it's a African proverb that say a child who does not feel warmth from the village will burn it down.
Mm.
And I was that child that did not feel loved and seen. So everything moving forward was to be a detriment,
Yeah.
not knowing that's really what I was causing. But however, it was a lash out on self, as a, hey, I'm going to, put myself around these kind of people and put myself around these kind of risks. It's something that I internalized that also then manifested to being a part of the legal system.
Your aunt and uncle must have been beside themselves with you,
Yeah.
because she does not seem like the kind of woman that would play around. You know what I'm
Yeah, yeah,
saying?
they were. Yeah, they was very furious, to say the least, for sure. They was very, and honestly, they really did a really good job of instilling morals and just principles. I think that allowed me to become the person that I am today, to really serve, and obviously show up in the community the way I do, because they really stood on great things. But I think myself, knowing the challenges that I went through, I veered into that path.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, I think what happens, Lorenzo, and I don't know if this is true for you, so I would love to hear your thoughts on this, is that you were clearly in an environment in that barbershop with your aunt in particular, very tied to your values.
yeah,
And
yeah,
when sorrow and despair and feeling lonely and invisible and all that grief hits, it can create a barrier
yes,
between you and your ability to connect to those values and ground yourself there. You become lost in the swirl of emotion and anger. And the proverb that you said, that when a child doesn't feel warmed by the village, they'll burn it down. That's why anger rises to the surface when people feel isolated and unseen and when they're struggling. And
yeah,
so it doesn't surprise me that, first of all, mental health challenges are what led you to losing your way, but that ultimately, when you started to address the mental health challenges, you found yourself easily connecting back with those values. And so, how did you turn it around? What was it? Was there a moment when you were incarcerated and you're 17 years old where you're like, I gotta turn this shit around? I'm either going down, like there are forks in the road in your life where you don't realize it in the moment, but you make one decision and it changes the rest of your life. So was there a moment where you had an epiphany as you're in this low place that you got to do something different? Like what happened?
Yeah, so I'll never forget the week coming up to court, and I just remember a lot of the kids in there. It was so a lot of them had been repeat offenders. They had been in and out, and we was finding out, you know, court was that Monday morning. It was like figured out who was going to be my judge, and it was this one particular judge that everyone was just like, yeah, if you get this judge, like they're going to lock you up longer. You'll be here longer. So I was doing everything I could to praying like, oh, I just hope I don't get this certain judge. Well, I so happily got a judge that was, very much opposite than what I think the other young people was saying while I was in there. But saying all this to say, that weekend as I sat in there and I was getting ready for court, it just kept rumbling in my head that this was the same place that I was born in. This is where my father was. And I just remember feeling just so hurt, so lost, so empty. And I remember saying, if I could get out of this, I don't ever want to experience this again. Now, I'm 17 years old. I'm a month before being 18. And I was supposed to be enjoying my last year of being in school at this time. And so got tied up with a gun and, following the wrong people. And so when I got to court that Monday, I was given a second chance. And a lot of it was because of my aunt. And I think them pleading with the court to give me another chance because I had never been in no prior trouble. And obviously I just got, caught up in a situation. But I remember promising the judge that if she could give me another chance, that I would go to college, that she would never have to worry about finding me in the system again. And I kept my word. And I look back today, and that's something that I always said that I never wanted to do was to be a part of, to have to go into that small room ever again and spend any time. And so, I think it was just a collective of just hating where I was in that moment, hating the way I felt, but also being scared to know that I could end up spending more time there if I didn't figure out how to get out of this situation or if it would continue. And so that just led me, to wanting to just change everything. And so, yeah, I think that was the turning point for me. That time that I spent, in juvenile was just really, it was just really eye opening, and I didn't really enjoy it. I hated every bit of it. And I was just, I think I just was so focused on wanting to be much better than I was. And I think it goes back again to just the values that my aunt and uncle really instilled in me growing up. Despite my challenges I went through, knowing that I could really create a life better for myself, regardless of where I had came from. So,
Well, I think it's so poignant what you said about the fact that you were reflecting on this is where I was born
yeah,
and this is not where I'm going to end up. And my father's story is not going to be my story.
yeah,
And it certainly isn't because you went from that courtroom back to high school, you graduated, you never looked back. You then went to Arkansas Baptist College. And what did you study there?
human services. Yep.
And for people that don't know what that means, what is human services?
Yeah, so it's mostly, I think in a better, broader terms, is supporting the quality of life and well-being of people, whether that's through, economics, civil, social practices of uplifting people. So the work that I do, obviously, right, is supporting, people to getting access to mental health services is I think, a clear example of, what I went to Arkansas Baptist College for. But it could also be as well as for, supporting, young people that, are that may be at risk of going into the criminal justice system. So those are just obviously just pure examples.
Okay, so you graduate. And
Yeah.
what was it like to graduate? You're like, "Damn, I did it. I'm gonna take this photo and send it to that judge and tell her I kept my word."
It was an illuminating experience. Again, I think it was one of those can't believe we made it. Can't believe I made it. So it was, and again, the people that I grew up around, the folks that I had went to school with, and most of the people just growing up in an urban community in the South. It was just one or more things. It was either I'm gonna go be an athlete and go to college, or I'm gonna get lost to the streets and get on some kind of drugs and never make it, or I may not make it at all and I may be dead. And so, it was just only a few options, and obviously I wasn't an athlete, and so and I think the other two options just wasn't favorable. So I did everything I could to know going to college, and I really worked hard to ensure that I could get my way out of that. And so I'm glad that I was, saw the favorable road to work towards, graduating and getting to this point. So,
Well, thank God you did, because your organization is now helping over 3 million people a year in terms of mental health advocacy. And so let's talk about the fact that right after college, you went and worked with the Department of Human Services. And, I'm outlining your story, Lorenzo, because again, you are an example of somebody who made a decision, who reconnected with his values, who leaned into the struggle, who allowed himself to be vulnerable, and you turned your whole life around. And now you're taking all of this and you've turned it into this incredible, incredible organization, the Confess Project, where you're helping millions of people. And
yeah.
your story and life is an example to all of us that if there is some change you want to make in your life, it is possible to do it. And if you are willing to serve others, you will be blown away by the difference that you can make. An environmental trigger is something that you encounter visually in a space that cues a certain thought or behavior. And a lot of us are aware of triggers in the negative sense. Oh, you trigger me. Oh, that sound triggers this. But you can use environmental triggers in a very positive and profound way. And I talk about environmental triggers extensively in the episode that we did called 5 Essential Hacks to Make New Habits Stick. And I love environmental triggers. And so for sure, this tattoo and your tattoo, that is a visual reminder that triggers a certain positive way of thinking. But you can use a Post-it note. In fact, this is the assignment, everybody. I want you to come up with a phrase, and you can borrow one that you've heard us say today and try it on for size, because it's sort of like you got to see if it fits. And how do you know if the phrase fits? You're not resisting it. You're not arguing against it. You're not saying the phrase, I'm beautiful. Yeah, but. No, you got to come up with something that feels right. It's sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? One's too little, one's too big, one feels just right. That's how you try this on. Then I want you to take a Sharpie, a permanent pen, and write it on a Post-it note and stick that sucker on your mirror or on your laptop, somewhere in your physical space that you're going to bump into it. Your bedside table, the way that Tracy does. Heck, if you're thinking about a tattoo, before you get a tattoo, make the tattoo in a Sharpie on your arm. And, I got to say, I don't want to hear any of you saying, Mel, I got a tattoo because of you. Like, you get a tattoo because you want a tattoo. Do not have me pressure you to get a tattoo. And I so believe in this. Don't you believe in this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the environmental trigger piece just makes such a difference.
Yeah. You have an interesting environmental trigger on your bulletin board. It's a photo of you. Why are you giggling?
I knew somehow you were going to raise this topic again.
Why? Guys, he is the cutest photo that our friend Jenny Maloney took. And it's a black and white photo of Chris. And he's looking off to the side and he's sort of smiling. And he posted it. He pinned it to his bulletin board. And he wrote in a Sharpie, you, with an arrow pointing at himself. And it sits right on his bulletin board at his desk, and I can see you tearing up. What does that photo mean? What does it trigger you to think?
Um, just to, I think it's I don't think it was, I was prompted to print the picture and tack it on my board as a piece of a homework assignment in a class that I'm taking, where I found myself through dream work and dream analysis to just need to be reminded that I'm perfect the way I am, that I'm yes, I'm good enough, or that who I am is who I am. And so it was a spontaneous response to work that I was doing in this class to say this was one of those hacks or habits I was going to develop, was to look at that picture every day and see me as I am and embrace and love that person.
Oh, this is for your master's in psych?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I think everybody's going to steal that one too.
I mean, I don't have a mirror in my office, so instead I put a picture of myself.
Environmental trigger, everybody. How do you know when it's a normal, distressing emotion versus something that you should be concerned about in either yourself or somebody else?
So there's a few ways. I mean, part of it is there's no real right feeling, right? You have the feelings you have. And I think that I would never want to say, you know, we always expect to see this feeling under these circumstances, because of course our feelings are informed by who we are, our histories, you know, what's come before. So there's not always a perfect map of what we expect to see. And here again, psychologists can just usually just take a much more curious, like borderline anthropological stance towards emotion as opposed to judging or valuing. But here's what we don't want to see. We don't want to see emotions getting in the way of people's lives. That's where we start to be concerned. So we fully expect to see sadness under sad conditions. We don't expect to see depression, which is where mood becomes so low that it really casts a pall over everything in a person's life. We fully expect to see anxiety if there's something wrong, right? If there's, danger around you or a lethal virus in the environment, right? We expect to see anxiety, but we don't expect anxiety to become paralyzing and get in the way of people's ability to do the things that really are safe or they can and should be able to do. So for us, the index is really much more about functioning. And do emotions undermine the ability to function well in the world? Because they should be supporting our ability to navigate our lives and deepen our relationships. They shouldn't be getting in the way.
So the real kind of takeaway here for all of us is that distressing emotion, it is part of being mentally well. But when you start opting out of seeing friends and you stop the kind of hygiene protocol of taking showers and exercising and eating, or you start over medicating your feelings with alcohol or weed or whatever, that's the red flag.
That's right. So I'm going to even tease that apart a little bit more. So the
Awesome.
emotions can either get in the way, right? So mood that actually disturbs the ability to live one's life, or, and you moved in this direction, it's such a critically important direction, what I would call costly coping. So people are coping with moods, but they're doing it in ways that come at a cost. So either abusing substances or being incredibly hard on the people around them, or turning it against themselves, whether, they're running themselves down or even engaging in self-harm. Those may be actually providing some relief. People only do things that actually work for them, but they come with a price tag. So that's the other thing we look for. So we look for a mood that gets in the way of the ability to live one's life, or coping that is a costly way to go about things, if not immediately, certainly over time. Those are the flags that we keep an eye out for.
I got it. 2 flags, mood and costly coping. And I want to role play for a little bit, if that's cool, because I
Sure.
love to leave our audience in action and empowered. And everybody, you have got to go pick up this book. It is not only so enlightening, but it is hopeful. I mean, I wish I had this book 3 years ago. And I'm so happy that I have it now because I find that these tactics are incredible, not only for our teenagers, all 3 of them, in our kids are 24 through 18, but also for adults and for people I work with. And so if you're in a situation where, let's just talk about the costly coping stuff that you talked about. I can't tell you how many parents and friends where we would confide in one another during the last 3 years. My kids are completely off the rails. Like, they're not even showing up for the Zoom classes. My son is hitting the vape, smoking weed, playing video games for 6 hours a day. I don't even care anymore. Like, the stress level is so high, as long as they're waking up in the morning and they're not mean to me. How do you, as a parent or a friend or a partner of somebody, you see somebody smoking too much weed, playing video games for too long, those sort of coping mechanisms, you're right, let you escape. How do you even begin to approach it? Because every time we would approach it in our household, you get the big shove back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think the first step is to really recognize that it is working for that person, that it is serving a purpose. And you described that, right? That substances can help numb distress. They're incredibly effective at that. That's the problem with them, right? Is that they work to make pain go
Oh my
away.
gosh, hold on a second. Can I just
Yeah.
stop there? I don't know that I've ever heard anybody ever hit the pause button and tell the truth
Mm.
that people engage in these behaviors because they work for them, which is why they become so damn defensive when you try to take them away from them.
Exactly.
Wow.
You know, this is where I'm so glad I got the training I did when I did, because the premise of my whole training is that humans are rational actors. They don't do things that don't serve a purpose, even if those things outwardly end up causing so much trouble. There's always a rationale. And that's actually the best part about my job, is that when people come my way clinically, my job is to figure out, you're doing this thing that is just damaging your life and getting in the way. We have to understand why, so that you then can feel like you've got some choices.
Wow. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just letting the profound nature of what you're asking us to do, because I can think of several friends who had daughters in particular, self-harm, cutting, very self-destructive behavior. And from the outside, you look at it and you panic, and then you make it wrong, and you want to do anything because you love this person to stop it. But why? Like, I think it means that we're missing this critical step in connecting, which helps us lead to the problem solving. So why is it so important, even though it's terrifying when your kid is hurting themselves or they're clearly escaping and addicted? Why is it so important to say to yourself, this is a coping mechanism that's working for my kid, and I actually have to start there?
Here's why it's so important. Because the alternative is a dead end. And what I mean by that is that if you come at a kid or anyone saying, you need to stop, and then fill in the blank, what you're going to run into is the part of them that is like, you don't get why this is working for me. And now you have a conflict. If you go the route of saying, you're a smart kid, you wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't working for you at some level, the conflict ends up in the kid or the adult that you're trying to help, between the part of them that doesn't want to be cutting or abusing substances or playing video games 8 hours a day.
Or running around and sleeping with the wrong people, or which is what I was doing in high school, but okay.
Yeah, right. I mean, whatever it takes to help yourself feel better. So there's a part of them that doesn't want to be doing those things, and there's a part of them that is doing those things. And the job of the helpful outsider is to try to get a conflict going between those two parts of the person who is doing the thing, and to stick up for the side that wants to be healthier. And that, I'll tell you the language that I remember when I learned this as a clinician around if a client comes in and is talking about suicide, right, which is of course terrifying.
Isn't it also normal to have suicidal ideation?
Let's come back to that. That's a
Okay.
really critical question. It's a really critical question. But sometimes clients will come in and talk about suicide. And I remember the day I learned the language from a senior clinician to say to someone, listen, clearly part of you is really thinking about hurting yourself, but part of you wants help. And that's the part that's telling me that you're having those thoughts. I'm going to stick up for the part of you that wants help. And that's how you don't turn it into a fight.
That's incredible. And I you can probably hear me, everybody. I've got a pen in my hand. So this is one of those conversations where I'm having a conversation and furiously scribbling notes, which I don't know why I have to do that given that I can listen to this again. But there's a part of you that is really considering this, or there's a part of you that is in so much pain that you're resorting to cutting to feel alive, or you're in so much pain that you're smoking dope so that you can just numb out and forget about it. But there's a part of you that wants help, and that's the part of you that I'm speaking to.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
You just say you wouldn't be letting me know if you didn't want help. There's a part of you that wants help.
What do you
And I'm gonna
do if they didn't tell you, or you don't, like, you know what I mean? Because a lot of times, particularly with these behaviors, people hide them.
It's true. So eventually you find out, or you smell the weed coming out of their room, or you notice that a young person has harmed themselves. So I think the first thing we want to do as sort of the helpful people who are trying to step in is to get to a place with ourselves where we feel a bit centered. Reacting strongly in those moments does not go well. But then I think it does sometimes happen that you have to confront a person about their behavior. And again, I think teaming up with them and teaming up with what I know all teenagers have and all adults have, which is that growth-giving, health-seeking side, is the way to go. So I think, let's just use marijuana as an example, and you can smell it.
I'll be the kid. So I'm
Okay.
sitting in my room. I've lit up a big doobie. I'm smoking. I don't even know you're outside, Mom, because I got my headphones on and I'm playing Minecraft and I'm scrolling on Instagram. I don't think you're home. Didn't hear the garage doors open. There I am in my room.
Okay, and here I come. So knock, knock, knock on the door, no answer, so I let myself in, right? And I say, oh, buddy, you and I both know that smoking weed like this is going to get in the way of the kind of life you want to lead. We got to figure out what's getting in the way of you making different choices.
Whoa. Like you just spoke to a different part of me.
That's the goal, right? That's
Now,
the
do you
goal.
leave the room? Do you just drop it like a grenade and then let that kind of settle for them? Or do you sit down on the bed? Like, because I think we just don't know what to do. And then we
Yeah.
get so emotional, Lisa, that we react, which makes
Yeah.
it worse.
Well, I think I'd see what the kid does, right? I mean, I'd sort of take the cue from them. I mean, because he just did say something. I think we also have to give kids room to come to where we are, right? I mean, I think it's so hard in parenting so often. And I have two teenagers myself, right? So often in parenting, we have a full head of steam. They walk in the door and we're like, we need to talk about boom, right? And the kid's like, whoa, like I was going to go get a snack, right? I was not ready for this conversation. So I think,
Plus, now I'm high, Mom, and my tongue feels like it's filled my mouth. I can't have a conversation.
I can't
with
have a
you.
conversation. So then I think you may, let's just say for the sake of argument, like this isn't a great time to have the conversation because the kid is not entirely available to it. And then I think you say, we're going to have a conversation. about what's happening here. And my favorite phrase, and I also remember the moment I learned this in my training, is because what we're doing isn't working. What you're doing isn't working, right? And that's the thing about substances. They do get to a place where they start to undermine a person's life, that they're not showing up at school, or they're underfunctioning academically, or they aren't actually maintaining friendships, or they're, not contributing to the home or the community. And so that becomes the thing. Like, you can't keep doing this because what you're doing isn't working. We have to come up with something else. So if you're in so much pain that you're doing this, we're going to find another way for you to address that pain. But the goal, and you can hear this in every approach, is to not turn it into a showdown between the person who's trying to help and the person they want to help.
That's amazing. It's like I just had this visual of kind of that. You're right. It is a showdown. The knock on the door, the screaming, the shame, the this. And now you're like putting your 40 or 50-year-old angst about this onto your 16-year-old, and it just compounds everything that they're trying to escape anyway. And I had this visual of, if you don't have that, as you said, head full of steam, but you can center yourself and realize you're trying to get on the same page with the part of them that wants to do better. And I had this visual, instead of pounding on the door, of literally like putting your arm around them. Like, buddy, I love that you're like, hey, buddy, and I love this. I wish I had talked to you 2 years ago, because that what you're doing isn't working. When my husband's depression came to a head, I was the bitch on the door knocking. And what I was trying to say is that what you're doing isn't working. And instead, of course, I'm like, thank God you're doing yoga and all this stuff, because you'd probably be dead if you weren't. But you got to start that. You're like, you got to get in therapy, and you got to take, but what I wish I would have known, and what I hope everybody's taking away, is that phrase: what you're doing isn't working.
We got to do.
We got to do something else.
And I'll tell you, Mel. So when I was in training, I had a really brilliant and terrifying supervisor, and she said to me, "You get 8 words an utterance." When you're listening and sitting with a client, they can say as much as they want to say. You can't go past 8 words. And the reason for this is, as soon as you're past 8 words, you're into somebody's head. You've bypassed their heart, right? But if you can keep it tight, and if you can go to the core of it in 8 words or fewer, it lands. And so what's interesting is that discipline of needing to find just the arrow, and the through line. That's how I've ended up actually being able to translate over into writing and podcasting and all of the other forms of work I do. Because if you're doing good clinical work, you're just going for the central message as cleanly and as easily understood as possible.
I love how you've simplified this for us. That you have really drawn this highlighter and highlighted the notion that distress is a really important part of being mentally well. And it's only when it becomes destructive to your mood and your daily functioning, or you start having costly coping mechanisms, that we gotta sound the alarm, so to speak, because what they're doing is working for them to escape or cope, but it's not helping. And so your role, and you've just made this, you are like an arrow hitting the target, Lisa. Like, this is your genius. That your job is to appeal to the greater part of them. What you're doing isn't working. And I'm here to help you figure out what could work.
Exactly.
Wow. What you also write in your latest bestseller, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, that there is a difference with how the different genders cope with stress. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Let me say a whole bunch of caveats first.
Sure.
Anytime we're looking at gender findings, we're looking at huge numbers. There's tremendous overlap between the genders. And then, of course, we've only really studied conventional genders. We've only really studied male, female. We are
Mm-hmm.
slow to the table to study kids who do not fit into one of the traditional categories. So everything I'm saying needs to sort of be couched in that broader understanding of how we do the research and what we've studied. So having said that, when we look at traditional gender categories, a pretty consistent broad finding is that when they are in distress, girls are more likely to discuss and boys are more likely to distract. And these are both actually acceptable forms of managing emotions. There's actually nothing wrong with either. But where we see trouble is if you veer to the extreme or you use that strategy all the time. That
Can you give us an
ideally we want.
example of what you
Yeah,
mean by discuss or distract so we kind of have a knowing and then also what's sort of within range of helpful coping and
absolutely.
what gets to be on the fringe?
Absolutely. So discuss, so let's say a girl, someone's mean to her at school. And she goes and finds her best friend. And she's like, you're not going to believe what so-and-so just did. She was so, such a jerk to me. And her friend says, oh man, she is such a jerk and I love you and you're fine and you're cool. Okay, yay, like good outcome. We like that. We could also have a boy where someone's a jerk to him at school and he's upset by it and he doesn't want to talk about it. But he goes home and he plays basketball for a little while, blows off steam, gets it out of his system, gets past it, lets it go, moves on. Those are two perfectly reasonable outcomes of those two different strategies. What we don't want to see is, and I'll just stay with the boy girl
Great.
stereotypes. We don't want to see is girls who then they discuss it with their friend and then they end up in a 3-hour conversation discussing it with their friend and then they are doing the like critical analysis of the text thread with the girl who was mean and then 4 other girls hop in on this. And there's two problems with this. One is, and this is sort of a secondary finding, girls are more likely than boys to engage in vicarious distress, meaning if my friend's upset, now I'm upset too.
Yes.
So it has this like widening, swath of distress. The other thing is that it threatens to turn into what psychologists call rumination, which is basically a spinning of one's emotional wheels. And though it's kind of gross, it's a really helpful metaphor. It's like picking at an emotional wound, right? The more you talk about it, the worse it gets. It's not healing up. Better to just leave it alone. So we don't want to see that extreme. And if we go down the boy stereotype, what we don't want to see is that, every time this kid has something that feels bad, he just shuts down, goes plays basketball or hops on his video game and just stays in this distracted place until the feeling dies down enough that he can tolerate it. Because the cost to him is, number one, he's not getting the kind of social support he deserves, right? Nobody
Yeah.
knows he's in pain. Number two, he's not actually developing the fluency in verbalizing emotions that we'd like to see. That part of what happens if we go down these boy-girl paths is that girls get better and better and better at talking about feelings because they practice it all the time. And boys can get worse and worse and worse at talking about feelings because they're not practicing it with one another, especially. And so the ideal management is somewhere in between, a little discussing, a little distracting, or any variety of other strategies that help to tame or express emotions. We just don't want to see anybody leaning too hard on one strategy.
Any final thing you want to say? Because there's a lot of people that are going to forward this to somebody in their life who has crippling anxiety or depression. And having been in that place myself and having been married to somebody who is struggling, I'll tell you what, when you're in a dark place, you are a stubborn son of a gun. And so, could you speak directly to that person right now who isn't listening to their family, doesn't want to hear it, has given up hope as a Harvard psychiatrist with 30 years under your belt, having worked with thousands and thousands of people and even cured major mental illnesses with this approach? What would you say?
So I think I would actually want to speak to them not as the Harvard psychiatrist with all of those credentials that you just list, and not with all the scientific knowledge that I have that emboldens me to know that what I'm saying to you is true. But I would want to speak to that person as somebody who's been there myself, somebody who suffered relentlessly for years from crippling depression. I couldn't get out of bed. I wanted to kill myself. I tried to kill myself several times. I could not imagine a future for myself. I really assumed that I would be dead before I turned 20. And that was really all but certain in my mind, that there's no way I will be alive when I'm 20. And what I would say to people is, if I can get through that, because I really did believe that I would be dead, that I could not possibly live like this for the rest of my life. And it had been going on for years, since I was a young child. If I can get better, so can you. And you just have to believe. And you have, if you're a skeptic, if you're doubting any of this, there's so much science to back it up. And the reality is, you really can do it for 90 days, for 3 months. You can do it. I have patients with horrible, crippling schizophrenia who can do it. I have patients with bipolar disorder who can do it. I have patients with alcoholism and other diagnoses that can do it. And if they can do it, so can you.
Dr. Chris Palmer, changing the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for checking this video out. And if you like this one, I have a feeling you're going to like this one too. I'll see you there.